All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and real quick, I wanted to let you know that Scott, you are our winner this month of the T-shirt and coffee mug giveaway. And just wanted to say thank you so very much, man, for being such a fan out there in Florida. And let me just rub it in the face of your good friend Neil. How's that sound? All right. Anyways, thanks, man. God bless you. And hope you and the family have a great summer. Also, this next month, I'm going to have an awesome little giveaway here with a book called A Young Researcher's Guide to Bigfoot by Gail Beatty and Deborah Ray. And I'll throw up some more images of that on the Facebook, and you can find it there. So awesome. Let me grab a sip of water. We're going to get in today's encounter story real quick. And I'm drinking some water because it's a hot summer right now. And here's another thing real quick. Let you guys know that I won't be able to check my emails too much next week. The old Boozer clan here is heading out to the wilds of the Pacific Northwest to go camping along the rugged Oregon coastline. So we'll be out there. But with that, let's get in and jump in to this week's encounter story. This one is called A Husband and Wife Harassed by Bigfoot in Family's Old Cabin near Berry Glen, California. My name is Ron. Nearly 10 years ago, outside of Berry Glen, California, in our family's old cabin, my wife and I inherited, we were literally harassed and what I thought more or less attacked by a crazed Bigfoot. Sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. And I thought I would share this with you. I never thought in a million years I would have this happen. Heck, I never thought they existed at all, except since I have spent my life working outdoors and in some pretty remote places, to be sure. But here's my story. Power lines and no Bigfoot. I worked on past tense power lines throughout Northern California after my service in the military until I retired a decade ago. This meant that I was sometimes out in the middle of nowhere, or at least far out of towns or cities working. There were times where camping nearby to a job site, if needs be, was simpler, cheaper, and easier than hotels and driving. Never once did I feel uncomfortable, weird, or endangered at all. Well, maybe once, but that was due to people problems, not wildlife. So no, I did not believe in Bigfoot at all, not until one attacked or harassed my wife and I about 9 years ago, almost a decade ago, at our family cabin in Northern California. We were actually in the process of getting all our ducks in a row with the family cabin we inherited from my father that was located outside of Berry Glen, a ways up Gold Bluffs Beach Road, if you know where that's at. There are not many homes out that way, actually, next to none other than our little cabin. The land was bought by my great-grandfather in the early 1900s, and on it he built a tiny cabin. Of course, over the years, especially by my dad and grandfather, the cabin was rebuilt and remodeled to look more like a log home than a log cabin. As a matter of fact, today it looks like a plush little 1,600-foot square home in the woods. There really is no yard, and the forest butts up against it on all sides of the cabin. The only real open area is the driveway, and that was nearly the length of almost two football fields between the road and the cabin. Like I said, we inherited the place, and we're currently staying there and making a decision on whether or not to live there for good, or just sit on it and give it to the kids one day. Well, we knew we'd give it to the kids, but living that far out, well, we were a little unsure about the idea. So to help us make up our minds, the wife and I decided to stay there one spring. I believe it was 2008 or 2009. Anyways, the place was already livable, with furniture, electricity, no cable though, but indoor plumbing, which is a blessing. That was installed a couple decades ago, but as a kid, I do remember the old outhouse, which is all but gone today. I also remember the stories my dad would tell us of Bigfoot, and the chance run-in great-grandpa had not too far away from here while fly fishing on the Lost Man Creek. The real story was quick and simple, I would learn later, after the long, drawn-out scary one Dad would tell us over the campfire as a kid. My grandfather was fishing and basically ran off by something huge, dark, and loud, I recall. My great-grandfather was fishing and was basically ran off by something huge, hairy, and dark, and loud. I recall my grandpa telling me he saw it once and was himself pretty sure great-granddad was telling the truth. But not once did I really think about it, let alone have any sort of incident or experience anything being in the mountains, working on power lines, camping, or any time for that matter up until that spring. And just so you know, they do exist, and they are not friendly, I believe. Knock, knock. Who's there? It's Harry, man. It started with two things: a knock on the cabin wall one night, and footprints that seemed odd and out of place. After that, it was all kinds of crazy. We had finally got settled in, and the plan was to stay there for the whole summer to give it a real good try at living here through the rest of our retirement. About 2 weeks in, and boom, it started. For nearly a week or two, we would be spooked first and harassed later. It was the beginning of the week, a Monday or Tuesday if I remember. The wife and I were sitting there with a fire going and some hot coffee, watching a movie on the old DVD player, then whack! Something hit the side of the old cabin. My wife almost jumped out of her skin, whereas I thought it was an owl or other large predatory bird of the night hitting the side of the cabin. It has happened before when I was younger. We once had an owl hit the side so hard it took it about an hour before it could fly off into the night again. I thought the lightning of that kind of thing just hit twice. No pun intended. I got up and told my wife to sit tight and I would check it out. No reason to take a gun. There was nothing around there I knew of at the time to be worried about. And personally, I was never afraid of much. That includes the dark. Heck, I spent time in the jungles of Vietnam. I am okay with the woods of the Pacific Northwest. Well, at least I was. I stepped off the porch and flashed the light back towards where the sound came from. Nothing. No birds, no animals, nothing. All was quiet, just the chirping of the crickets. I headed back in and told my wife it was most likely a bird, and we left it at that. The next morning I was out getting some firewood in for the day when I noticed what looked like footprints in the soft soil near that side of the cabin. Like I said, our cabin is surrounded by forest on all sides, and it literally butts up to it within 20 feet or so. Near the edge of the house is some dirt area that was rather soft, moist dirt with pine needles everywhere. But almost a foot or so from the cabin, I noticed what looked like heel prints, 2 of them. I could not make out toes of any kind, so I thought perhaps the smack the night before could have come from a bear. While they looked a little like heel prints of a human being, there was no way it could have been that, so I figured they were left by a bear and that they were just messy paw prints in the soft dirt. I had told my wife, and while it did put her to ease at what it was, she still said we need to be careful. Of course, I knew that, but I always listened to my little city girl. It's breathing. We got rather comfortable within the next few days. Even my wife was taking to the mountain life for being the city girl she was. She was born and raised in San Francisco. We met, dated, married, and moved to Santa Rosa and spent the last 30 years there. I inherited the cabin, and she, to my amazement, suggested we retire there for good, so we moved. By the second week, we were having a blast, hiking, fishing, in the nearby creeks, and so on. And my wife had gained some knowledge about berries and stuff and started collecting and canning them before we moved up here, which was fast becoming a hobby for her. It was a night or two into that second week when my wife heard something outside the kitchen window that literally scared her to death. Breathing. Heavy breathing. I was watching some crazy movie when she got so startled she dropped a jar and it broke. She was canning at the time, actually, filling them full of some berries she picked earlier that day. She was leaning over the sink when she heard what sounded like breathing coming through the window over the sink. The worst part was when she looked up and noticed something dark, a shadow or whatever, move away from the window. She gasped aloud and dropped a jar on the floor that shattered the second it hit it. I came running in almost immediately when I heard the glass shatter. She just stood there looking out the window and whispering to me that she thinks someone is or was out there, outside the window, looking in. I was a little rattled myself at this and went straight for the handgun. I kept a high-powered rifle and handgun in the cabin loaded at all times. I went out the front door and slowly made my way around the side of the cabin towards the side where the window of the kitchen was. Nothing. Nobody. Nothing. No sounds. However, being in the military and being somewhat of an outdoorsman, I noticed the crickets were quiet. There was no sound coming from the forest. I was not alone, and I could feel it. I shined the light from the kitchen window and back to the forest. I moved the light along the edge of the forest, but saw nothing. Then again, how could you? It was thick here, real thick, much like the jungles I was hunting the enemy in for 2 years. I started to turn and head back when I heard footsteps running away from the other side of me, probably about 30 yards away to be exact. Whoever it was definitely a who, because only people run out here on 2 legs. And that is what I was hearing. I figured I would give the local authorities a call the next day and let them know there is a crazy person running around my property. It'd be about 24 hours before the local sheriff made it out there, and what he started sharing with me was crazy, to tell you the truth. He confided in me and told me that Bigfoot ran around up here from time to time and have for a few decades or more. I blew it off, even though it brought back the stories of my great-grandpa. I listened to his advice about leaving them alone and staying clear of them, but that was it. I listened, in one ear, right out the other. Get off my property. My wife was rattled and on edge with the breathing outside the window, not to mention the movement. I have to say, what the sheriff did relay to me stuck with me, even though I did not believe a word of it. But I would, and no more than 2 nights later. The wife was asleep, I remember. I was lying there reading a book about tracking late at night. The only light was that of the moon and my book light. I figured if there is something running around the cabin at night, I might as well figure out what it was for sure. Within minutes, I found out exactly what it was, actually. It was warm that night, finally, and I left the window open a bit, and as I laid there, I heard something step close to the window, or movement at least. Then, once again, breathing. In and out it breathed, the heaviest breaths I've heard. It was what I thought could be a gorilla or a large bear would sound like when standing still and just breathing. I shut my book, turned off my light, and bam! That is when whatever it was walked right past the window. And I mean, it walked. There was a giant man or person outside my cabin. I can't tell you how much adrenaline started pumping through me. I felt almost paralyzed by it. I reached over, however, grabbed my gun out of the nightstand and slowly made my way quietly to the living room to look out the window. At first I saw nothing, and I heard nothing again as well. Immediately I knew whatever or whoever this was, well, they were still around. And they were, just to the right of the driveway. I noticed movement, swaying in fact. To the right of the driveway is the part of the property with the tallest trees and the thickest brush. Although trees are everywhere here, and the brush is just like a jungle, like I said. What I saw was a person, or the top part of a person, from the waist up, leaning from behind a tree, then moving back behind it over and over again. And it was tall, at least 9 feet at least. It was dark too, no real color to it, just a solid black mass with the outline of a human, but not human, all at the same time. Its arms seemed longer as they literally wrapped around a smaller redwood tree that was pretty common up here. And when the light from the moon did penetrate the canopy of trees, I swear the eyes were a yellowish red color. I could definitely tell there was eyeshine. It looked at me, well, I felt like it was, and I seriously felt as though it could literally see me plain as day in the dark. After about a minute of watching this thing sway behind the tree looking at me, it stepped out from behind it. I was almost completely floored at what I was seeing. A massive monster of a thing just standing there near my SUV in the driveway. I started shouting for my wife and even told her to grab the cell phone. The next thing I knew, my wife was standing there looking at the same monster I was. And then, all of a sudden, that thing came at the cabin. Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin. I did not believe this thing wanted in, but I believe it wanted us out and gone, period. It started thrashing about the cabin and the walls, hitting it with what I thought at the time was all of its force. But thinking about it later, if it really did, it would have smashed a wall or two in, I believe. It did not like us there. That was the feeling I was getting. Seconds later, it stopped and watched we watched through the front window as it walked off. And once again, I literally mean it walked off past the car and into the forest. My wife said that was it, no more. She wanted to move back to town. I cannot blame her. It was just after 11 p.m., I remember correctly, when we finally settled down and decided to sleep on the couch until morning. It was all quiet, and through the crack in the window nearest the kitchen I could hear the crickets return, and then we fell asleep. But not for long. I should have left. I should have gotten my wife in the truck and SUV and just left. I started with a whack on the window nearest the kitchen. It woke me up, and I could not hear the crickets outside. Slap! Again, another hit against the wall, and I was wide awake. Suddenly, as I woke, my wife, a scream from the pit of Hades came through the window, and was so loud, in fact, we had to cover our ears. When it stopped, we scrambled to get what we needed, and then started figuring out how to get to the vehicle without being torn to pieces. Classic diversion, I supposed. It worked on everything from people to predators, as far as I knew, and at that moment I felt like this Bigfoot thing was a predator. It smacked the side of the old cabin again, and this time we could feel the place rattle a bit, at least the pictures and other things on the walls and mantel. It started almost barking like a rah, 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 3 times at a time, and it repeated it at least 4 to 5 times. Was it calling others to its location? The thought had me almost peeing myself, to tell you the truth, Dave, and I was not going to sit around and find out. I quickly shut off the light to the front porch and turned on the back one. Fortunately, these were the days of keyless entries, and we had it on our vehicle. I hit the unlock button on the key fob and decided to make a noise out the back door. I took an apple, opened up the back door quietly, threw it as hard as I could into the trees and bushes. Of course, I was actually quite frightened about opening any door at the moment, but you do what you gotta do when you need to do it. So I did, and it worked. I heard that thing grunt from around the side of the house as it seemed to start walking in the direction of the noise I made by throwing the apple. I grabbed my wife by the hand and quickly but quietly scooted out the front door, into the dark, and into the front seat of the truck. I turned it over, and that is when I heard something to the left scream and start crashing through the woods right at us. I believe it was the same Bigfoot, as it was coming from the left side of the house, but it seemed to be coming from the back side. We peeled out and left, and never saw that thing again. We will not leave. Most people, though, believe we should have left. I know. Even the sheriff said we should have, and was downright animated about the fact. But even my wife believed we should not be scared off by some animal of the forest, no matter what kind of animal it was. Gotta love her. She's got some guts, I tell you. The sheriff helped me on his time off do what we could do to keep this Bigfoot away. We did all kinds of things, and what I think has worked the most was shooting on an almost daily or weekly basis with guns. Since then, I've become a pretty awesome shot, I have to say, and the cabin has been free, we think, of Bigfoot for some time now. Personally, I believe it was passing through, and I think they have for a long time now, even when my great-granddad owned the place. I hold no grudge with the thing, and I know that I have seen, now that I have seen one, and I know the signs I need to know when they come around again, and I'm sure they will come around again. I'll know that they're only passing through, and I just need to let them be. Thanks, Dave.